I actually have an unusual perspective on this. I am somebody who is not a fan of commercial sex. I would prefer if we did not have commercial sex. However, I realize it's not going away anytime soon. I realize that all the laws we've tried, all the various permutations and changes in laws have not made it go away. It's something that's very hard to get rid of. What we've also been hearing, which I think is fairly well known, is that when you do try to use the criminal justice system to prevent commercial sex, that brings in a lot of complications, a lot of side effects, which are not very good. So police feel that they can have sex even without a sex worker's consent because the sex workers are bad people and they're the good guys. So in effect, they feel they have license to rape. We've been hearing about SWAT raids and so on. We've been hearing about cases where people won't go to ask for help when they're being trafficked because because even though our laws are meant to catch the trafficker and not the victim, even though the laws that mention trafficking are meant to catch the trafficker and not the victim, the way the laws are written, if the only way you can count as a victim is if you are not, if your only role in the industry is to be the victim, if you've become accustomed to the industry and you work with fellow sex workers and help support them, you can be charged with trafficking. So our exceptions for victims are a little too narrow, unfortunately. So even though I would like to see less commercial sex, I think it's pretty obvious that things like rape, sex without consent, and some of the other side effects are worse, and regardless of whether they're worse or not, they don't succeed in solving what I regard as the problem of commercial sex. So I think it is time to do a rethink of this, and it's good to have a study commission. A study commission has the benefit that you can actually look at the issue, hear different evidence, go through various ideas, and then the General Assembly gets to take another crack at it from the beginning without it having to be rushed through. I do realize a lot of people in the commercial sex industry are not. A lot of people in the commercial sex industry are not there voluntarily. There are some who are trafficking victims. Not everybody who's called a trafficking victim is, but there are some who really are trafficking victims. There are some who were seduced into the sex industry. There are people who have been in the sex industry, and basically the criminalization and the bad record attached to it is keeping them from leaving it. And also I want to emphasize it's especially a problem for trans people. About the only place in our society where you can be valued by others specifically for being a trans woman is in the sex work industry. Almost everywhere else in our society, trans women are looked down on, but in the sex work industry, trans women can be valued for being trans. So that's that, in addition to the overall prejudice against trans women, helps to drive a lot of trans women into the sex industry, and then when they get arrested, or when the police come, even if the police come by, because there's so much prejudice against trans people, the court system will tend to deal more harshly with trans people than anybody else, and that's documented. So it's especially unfair to trans people who are facing all these social pressures. We've heard, I'm sure people who've been on the Judiciary Committee for a while have heard about the problems we have with rape in our society, with domestic abuse and physical abuse. There are some cultural traits which are subcurrents in parts of our society that enable rape, enable physical abuse, and I'm glad not everybody subscribes to those cultural traits, and some people are trying to free themselves from them, but these are problems in our culture, and unfortunately, the kind of cultural messages that enable rape and physical abuse come down especially hard on sex workers, whether they were sex workers voluntarily or not. It comes down especially hard on sex workers. A lot of people feel it's okay to rape a sex worker, to be physically violent to sex workers. We've heard that there are people who are serially violent towards sex workers, raping them or even killing them. And that's a real problem which criminalization does not help with. So I think it's good to take another look at the laws, see if we can find a way to deal with these very serious problems that are affecting the lower income people who go into the sex work industry and inject lots of people. And one of the very good things about this bill is it's focused on hearing from those who are affected, from hearing from the sex workers and giving them a voice in drafting the bill. And I'm not claiming that sex workers are the only people affected by sex work. They're not. But what we hear over and over in this area of the law is there are laws that are well-intentioned that claim they're going to stop sex work or get rid of sex work or stop sex trafficking or get rid of sex trafficking, and they keep backfiring. And one reason is the sex workers who are most directly affected are never given a voice in drafting the laws. And by giving them a voice in this process, we're likely to come up with laws that are more humane, that don't backfire, that don't end up being just another avenue for reinforcing prejudice against people, some of whom aren't even in the industry voluntarily. I realize it's hard to measure how much sex work is going up or going down, but I do think that there are solutions that can be crafted that won't make any aspects of the problem worse, but will try to rewrite some of these misconceived laws with the benefit of the input you can get from sex workers whose views have been neglected, and will make sure that some of the bad consequences of criminalization can be ameliorated, and that more help is available for the different kinds of help people need, whether they're trying to leave the industry or not. So that's what I hope this bill will do. Thank you.